atmosphere is something that you expect here on this earth. But this was something that wasn't supposed to even exist.
Pascagoula 73 is the case we should be concentrating on. It's almost perfect. 2 witnesses, interviews at the sheriff, interviews at the Air Force base.
But it appeared to me that it was about 30 or 40 foot long and maybe 8 or 10 foot high.
Lots of other sightings, things seen in the river, other witnesses who were on the opposite side of the river that night.
I even asked that to him before he died. I said, do you remember me saying there's somebody out there I can see him? And he said, yes, I do. And he said, I lied about that. I did see what they said, what you see. But I didn't want people to think I was crazy.
And on we go. It even made its way into popular culture. Even Walter Cronkite covered the story.
For weeks now, there have been reports of UFO sightings in many parts of the country, but especially the Gulf Coast.
One newspaper put a sketch of a supposed extraterrestrial visitor on the front page.
His abduction and other people as well coming forward saying, I saw this, that, and the other.
I don't know what it was. I know it wasn't a plane or a helicopter.
So I opened the door after a few seconds to step out to see if I could really tell what it was, and it just took off.
And the case just took off from there.
Calvin Parker, I was questioning him, and at one time he wanted to climb the wall. I saw how nervous and how shook up he was. And then the examiner, he began to wonder himself. So he ran the third test, and he believed just what Mr. Dixon had told him.
So you would believe them then? Oh yes, there's no doubt whatsoever that they were telling the truth.
The sheriff who was involved, Sheriff Fred Diamond, 2 nights later had his own UFO sighting.
These things weren't beings, they were robots.
Yeah.
I believe the beings that has contacted me since then was the beings that were controlling these robots.
If his fantasies are fact, it is the greatest threat to the well-being of the people of this nation.
I think they'd had a drink. That's just what I think about them.
My next guest is a documentary filmmaker who's been chasing the hidden, the strange, and suppressed for over a decade. Darcy Weir has carved out a unique space in the world of UFOs, conspiracies, and the unexplained, creating films that explore the bizarre, the hidden, and sometimes the terrifyingly plausible. In his documentary on Phil Schneider, Darcy dives into the disturbing claims of a man who said he survived a firefight with alien beings in an underground base. And in the underground, he explores the possibility that secret military installations are far more advanced and far more secret than most people realize. Now, with his latest series, Pascagoula 73, Darcy takes us back to one of the most compelling and controversial abduction cases in American history, re-examining it through a modern lens with new witnesses and stunning revelations that are turning heads in the UFO community. With recent whistleblower testimony and a cultural shift towards disclosure, Darcy's work feels more relevant now than ever. Tonight, we'll dig into his latest projects, the stories that keep him up at night, and what he thinks is really going on behind the curtain. Please welcome Darcy Weir to The Night Shift. Start. I've been on my channel focusing a lot more and trying to focus a lot more on experiencers, contactees, abductees. And it was right around that time that I was kind of planning out my next couple of weeks that I got the press release for Pascagoula 73. And I saw it and I reached out to Emma and I was like, I don't know, I'm just going to do a shot in the dark and see if I can get in contact with you. And she was so great, and everything seemed to work out really smoothly. How's the reception been for the film since it rolled out?
Good so far, yeah. Stars have aligned. I have really enjoyed speaking with people I have so far. You're one of 4, so yeah, it's been good, and it's had some journalists do reviews of it, you know, like film critics and stuff like that. So it's been pretty good.
Do you have a particular interest in any one aspect of the phenomenon in particular? Like, experiencers or abductions, or is it all just equally fascinating?
I mean, there's so many aspects of the phenomenon that interest me. I guess like one of the top aspects would be the cover up, which is like proof through documentation and testimony and, actions taken by the powers that be, the intelligence community, the defense community, like the Air Force, the Navy and such. Proof that they've, known about this phenomenon, but they've actively tried to dissuade public interest in it or explain that there's nothing to see here. That has been probably something I've focused on as a theme in many of my documentaries. I've only done like 2-3 experiencer docs, really. And this is, a docu-series. So I want to believe like all of this stuff, I think there's credibility to many different slices of this conspiracy, basically. And the experiencer one is obviously something we should take seriously, because people are not only seeing lights or, metallic objects flying in the sky or in the ocean, or in space for that matter, but they're also sometimes meeting the occupants, and that's pretty amazing.
Don't you feel like that should be a bigger part of the conversation? I feel like we've gotten so focused on the disclosure concept and the whole idea of this government cover-up that a lot of the experiencer and contactee and abductee stories have kind of taken a back seat to this other conversation because it's so nuts and bolts and it's something we can get our arms around. Do you feel like that's the case?
Yeah. I think it is something that's going to be discussed more and more in the mainstream, especially from a lawmaker standpoint. Like I was at the 2024 November 13th Washington, D.C. hearing, the UAP hearing, where Tim Gallaudet, Mike Gould, and Michael Schellenberger presented on the phenomenon. And they did mention in that very groundbreaking congressional record meeting that there's discussion of a hybrid program and underground or under ocean structured bases that seemed anomalous. And they discussed, where they could be coming from. So all that stuff never has been read into the congressional record before. So we're actually kind of living in exciting times in terms of history of this phenomenon and it being taken more seriously.
What's your take on kind of the state of play right now? It seems like since 2017, things have been picking up a lot of steam. There's a lot more momentum than there used to be. Do you get the sense that we are going to see this thing come to some kind of resolution in our lifetime, or maybe even in the next few years, as some have said, or do you think there's more going on here?
Resolution would be a pretty long shot, I think. I think it would behoove the DoD to admit more about the secrecy of this stuff, but it wouldn't serve them in the end, because they would have to admit to what they've done to keep that secrecy. And that may include hurting people. That may include, taking away civil liberties, spying on people, and harassing people like no one's ever heard of before. And then just the fact that they lied to admit to the public that they've been lying for many, many years now about this subject, and ridiculing people or downplaying the issue. That's a lot for them to admit to, that makes them look pretty bad.
Do you think it's one highly organized them, or do you think it's a bunch of them spread out in different programs doing different things? In other words, is this one program organized from the top down, or are there overlapping, maybe different programs going on kind of unbeknownst to one another?
I think it's definitely compartmentalized and stovepiped so well that, you know, there's certain apparatus or certain agencies that don't know about each other's programs. But I think that the CIA knows fully well, the FBI knows fully well. Actually, there was a recent story that came out from Ryan Graves, the pilot that chased that UFO off the coast of Virginia. He said that he's been told that the FBI fully knows about this subject and they actively are trying to keep it, you know, on wrap, not public. So I think there's, and they would get read into it, especially if it becomes some kind of national security issue, right? So if something's crashing or landing and people are getting frightened by that and they're reporting it to the police, the FBI actually might be the best intelligence agency to interact with that. Local police enforcement don't really have, you know, any structure or methodology to tackle this type of stuff, I don't think. So it's almost like Dana Scully and Fox Mulder were based off of some kind of real FBI reality. But I think that the Air Force, you know, we know that they engaged with this subject during the Project Blue Book era. They, in my opinion, were just covering up that whole time. They were trying to catch all, which is similar to what Arrow is doing right now. It's literally called the All Domain Resolution Office or whatever. So like all meaning they want to intercept this phenomenon from every single walk of life if possible. And probably keep that data. It's very similar to what Project Blue Book did. They were trying to intercept it, right? So I think the defense agencies definitely know about this. Certain people are read in, other people are not. It's the age-old saying, need to know. And if you're not read in, you probably ridicule it or think it's not real for the fact that you don't have the need to know and you've never been exposed to this information.
Do you get the sense that something outside of maybe our government or outside of our military intelligence apparatus is propelling this whole thing forward? Maybe the phenomenon itself has plans of its own to do some kind of a reveal. And we've certainly heard a lot of rumors about stuff like that coming up in the next few years. Do you, I don't know, you have your ear to the ground. What's your take on that?
I mean, nobody's ear is adequately enough to the ground to really tell that truth. I think it's almost impossible to predict that, right? Like, who has that information is really the biggest question. So is it somebody from a defense or intelligence agency that's saying that they know that the phenomenon themselves are trying to keep this under wraps? Who are the phenomenon, right? Like for years, there's been so many discussions about different entities or non-human intelligence that's been interacting with us, right? There's the Greys, there's the Nordics, there's the tall whites, or maybe they're the same. There's the lizard people, like the reptilians or whatever, right? It just kind of, it's all over the map. And I feel like some of that is folklore. It's like people that have expanded on the mythos of this phenomenon. But then there's other cases that seem to be more credible, you know? For example, there were people that were on the ground alive in 1947 that said when the crashed craft was being retrieved and cleaned up, there were bodies and there was even possibly a live entity that came off of that craft. That was one of the earliest descriptions of something that was like a gray, right? Like a large cranium creature with big almond-shaped black eyes. It did seem to wear some kind of like jumpsuit or something like that. Spindly, very thin, short. That is something abductees have reported quite often. Travis Walton described something like that. Not exactly, though. They had like large human eyes with pupils, not like big black eyes, devoid of any color. Then you had Betty and Barney Hill. They described something like that as well. You know, Jim Sparks described something like a gray. You've got, I mean, all kinds of other people that are part of Edgar Mitchell's FREE study, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Claims. Over 3,000 people there that describe different experiences with non-human intelligence. And it ranges, but it often describes something like a gray. And so when you get really like off of that track and you go into like reptiles, that, you know, Star Trek, Captain Kirk fought a reptile in the 60s,
Gorn.
right? Yeah,
How could we
Gorn.
forget?
So how do we know that that didn't get worked into the mythos of the UFO community? Because it's kind of adjacent. It's part of science fiction pop culture. You know, Barbara Lamb would probably beat me over the head with her cane if she heard me talking like that, because she's held hands with a reptilian and had romantic engagements. So it's like, it's just, this information is all over the map. I would like to think that if there was a non-human intelligence and they were exploiting humanity, then it would make sense that they would want us to not know about them, because it's better to exploit without people having that strategic advantage of knowing they're being exploited.
And then you have this whole other dimension to this thing where you have people like Bud Hopkins and John Mack interviewing and regressing abductees, and there's all these screen memories that are put up to sort of cover up what exactly was going on. They have to work through the screen memories, and it's very hard to suss out where that ends and where the reality begins. And it seems to me like, I'm a fan of David Jacobs, and he probably has the most frightening take on all this, but he seems to be of the mindset that we should be regressing people all the time, that these are the people who've been on board the craft. Ostensibly, they would have intelligence, they would have information and understanding about what's going on board these craft, what the motives and disposition of these beings may or may not be. And I always found that really interesting. And in particular, the Pascagoula case, because it is so unique in all of the abduction cases that are out there, it stands out head and shoulders above the rest, because these guys were so affected by it and they were so serious about their story. Can you talk a little bit about what drew you to that story as a filmmaker and a storyteller? What were you going for with this project?
I was probably just going for more clarity on what happened and what was said and what could be proven as to something actually happening, and, you know, what the whole, speculation after that is, and formulate it into something that's chronological, understandable. This is not like the first documentary that I've done on abduction. I did one with a friend a while back now called Being Taken, and that had Stan Friedman, Kathleen Martin, Travis Walton. We covered the Betty and Barney Hill case and, you know, paleo abductions and basically everything in between. And I had heard about this case. I thought that this was a really interesting case back when I was in my teens. The fact that two guys were just fishing on a river in Mississippi, and all of a sudden this light just appears and these entities come off the craft and grab them and take them on board, and, you know, then they're deposited back and they're completely awake the whole time. Like, the difference, one of the main differences between this case and other cases is the missing time element. Like, that is something Bud Hopkins wrote about. David Jacobs also discussed a lot. But this case, they didn't have missing time. They were completely wide awake the whole time, and they were having a panic attack the moment they were picked up to the moment they were dropped off, and years after, you know? So it's just a fascinating case. That's what drove, attracted me to it. And actually, I was communicating on social media with Philip Mantle, who's the British man that pretty much is the narrator and main researcher of this whole case. He's in England, and he reached out to me and said, hey, would you ever be interested in covering this case, doing a documentary about this? And I said, well, yeah, sure. If there's enough information about it, I don't really know that much. And he said, I've got everything that you'll need. You know, we could work it that way. I could show you how this makes sense, give you all the archival data. So I flew over to England. I traveled up north to where he lives, and I interviewed him in his home, and that's where we started.
So for people who aren't familiar with this case and exactly why it is so unique, can you give us the 30,000-foot view and some sort of atmospherics on what is the Pascagoula case all about, and why is it such a standout case?
Okay. There's a few things that make it a standout case. So first of all, we kind of discussed the non-human intelligence types that people have reported, especially abductees. They often report the grays. But this case is really about two men that were taken on board a craft by allegedly robots, like creatures that resembled some kind of automatons that were carrying out a research mission. One man, Charlie Hickson, who was 42 years old, he was brought to the right to a room and just observed by like an orb, a sphere type device that revolved around his body and scanned him. The other man, 19 years old at the time, had just gotten a job at the same company as Charlie Hickson, so had moved in with him. They were family friends. Charlie was friends with Calvin's father. He helped him get this job. Charlie's girlfriend was native to that area, so they got to see each other a bit more. They're now, they got married eventually and had a family. But these guys were taken on board, and Calvin reported seeing these beings, the robotic things, and then this female type humanoid, let's say, examine him. And one of the other standout things in terms of the history of the subject and abduction and, ufology was the fact that the man who was at the head scientifically and doing the PR for the Project Blue Book program, J. Allen Hynek was the guy who actually intercepted this story in the first week that it happened. And he went public saying, I've interviewed the men, I've examined them, this seems legit. And this is coming from a guy that before was tasked with debunking UFO and experiencer cases. And he said, the reason why I think this is legit, because I don't think they're lying. I think they actually have been through traumatic experience. And he also likened it to other experiences he had spoken to before. But I don't think Project Blue Book had ever really covered that type of thing. They stayed away from that. They really looked at the objects people were reporting, and then tried to associate them with prosaic things. But those people that reported them would have been going through some kind of ontological shock, right? Which is that like hysteria, shock, just awareness and fear and all kinds of emotions. So he had seen that before, and he was seeing that in these men.
That's right. They were at the police station, were they not? And they had a secret recording, which you feature in the first part of this series.
Yeah,
and you can hear them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
So James Harder and J. Allen Hynek actually came along later on. They came on the Friday of that week, and they did the first sort of debrief hypnosis session with Charlie. Calvin was still kind of in a state of panic, and they did a physical examination of both men and found wounds on their bodies. The secret tape, that was recorded by Sheriff Fred Diamond and his one of the other policemen in the police station the night that the abduction happened, October 11th, 1973. They walked in to this room. They planted this recorder somewhere on the table, under the table, and they then led the men in. They started asking them questions. You can hear at the starting of the secret tape, like, have you guys drank anything tonight? No, sir. Have you done any marijuana? No, sir. You know, are you hungry? Do you need any coffee? Like that type of thing. And then they leave the room, and that's where Calvin and Charlie start just having this frantic conversation that they're panicked still, right?
Kind of chilling to sit there and listen to it in its entirety. And you hear Calvin, I think it's Calvin, right? He's kind of freaking out. He's like, I have to leave. I can't stay here. I got to go. His mental state is in real disarray.
Yeah. He's basically having a panic attack. And, one of the police officers remarked later that he had seen Calvin try to climb the wall. Like he was in such a state of panic,
And Calvin was 19 at the time that this happened. Is that right?
Yeah. Calvin was a 19-year-old man, young man, and Charlie was 42. Charlie was more calm about all this. And something that was interesting to learn about him in the making of this doc is that, he was in the Korean War. So he was under fire, heavy fire in the Korean War. He thought he was going to die. And he had an older captain looking after him who said, don't worry, keep your head low. We're going to wait, relax. We're going to get out of this. And so when he got abducted, he was in a state of panic. And he said his internal monologue was that he thought they were going to kill him, right? Like, okay, here's another situation where I'm in the thick of it. I hope they just get it over with quickly, is what he was saying to himself. And then when he realized that they were just kind of like examining him, and it seemed like a bit of a research sort of thing, he collected his mind and said, okay, I'm going to get out of this thing. So when he was deposited, he was actually, trying to speak to Calvin, picking up Calvin off the side of this sandbar, the riverbank. And Calvin was just like wide-eyed and mouth open and couldn't even speak.
What you would expect.
Right.
From something like that. Yeah.
So it's like that, juxtaposition, somebody who's lived a life and been through tough situations and can rationalize their mind around these issues and get beyond that and collect themselves. And then somebody who's not lived a life, a young man, who's completely suffering from trauma. And that's kind of how it went for many years. Like, Charlie was talking about this publicly for a long time. Calvin was not. Calvin only spoke about this, like, the most speaking he ever did about it was post 2008. He did a few little appearances here and there, but he wasn't confident about it and he didn't want to.
He had a nervous breakdown at one point, did he? But in the beginning?
Yeah, in the first month, he was in a hospital at one point. Like, he was not doing well. And then after that, I think they moved away. He worked in oil and gas down there in like the Gulf region. And every time the press found out where he worked, he would leave his occupation.
So he wasn't able to, it's really destroyed his life in many ways.
I think he still had a good life. He raised a family. His wife and him stayed together till the end, and he had some kids and they enjoyed their lives, and he made all of his money through 9-to-5 hard work type stuff. Right. but he never relied on like the UFO community to derive income or something like that. You know, he was like an experiencer that didn't really want to become famous for that. But at the end of his life, he just said, what the heck? I'm going to write a book about this and set the record straight. And that's how he met Philip Mantle.
So at the end of his life, what was his perspective on the events that had taken place in 1973?
So I believe his perspective from what was conveyed in the documentary is that, you know, there's a non-human intelligence interacting with the planet. They're worried about our planet and the destruction of it and the destruction of each other. And he thought that there was some research being conducted on bloodline and you know, he and Charlie were examples of that research. And yeah, I don't know if he thought that they were from like a specific star or something like that. He just thought that the female looking entity, first of all, he thought she was kind of attractive. And he said if he had a beer or two, he might ask her on a date. Second of all, he said, you know, she resembled something human, but didn't look fully human. And he thought later on that the face she was wearing was kind of like a mask. So maybe she was kind of a robot too. Who knows?
There was a detail in Travis Walton's story, I think it was Travis Walton's story. Didn't he say that he initially saw them and they didn't look human, and then he kind of freaked out and got upset, and then they left the room, and later he goes into a different room on the ship and he sees humans, or what he sees appears human, I guess. That was an interesting twist. Is that something similar? Did that strike you as similar to that case?
No, it was a little bit different. There are similarities, though, for sure. I think with Travis Walton's, and, you know, when I interviewed him some years back, he was kind of thinking that perhaps the people that he met later that were like attractive blondes wearing blue, like jumpsuits, tight fitting, were like visual projections, possibly by the original beings that were around him when he woke up. The original beings had, like, you know, the large cranium, large eyes. They were thin, shorter than him, and they, you know, had large like spindly looking hands and stuff like that. But they didn't speak verbally to him. And what he saw later didn't speak verbally to him either. He was pleading with them, please, where are we? Help me. And, you know, you got to get me out of here, whatever. Who are you? Help, that type of thing. They didn't say anything. So he figured it might have been kind of like a projection to make him feel more comfortable. Whereas in this case, the female had like blonde hair. Yes, check. She had like a flat chest. So I think the female in the Travis Walton one was kind of busty. She was kind of hotter. Calvin definitely wouldn't need any beers. And then in this case, the being was like very thin and nonverbal. He said that he got telepathic imagery of a future dystopia and stuff beamed into his head at one point from this thing. So there are similarities, but differences too.
Is that where this notion that they were concerned about humanity and they were trying to protect us from ourselves, is that where that comes from, this telepathic communication?
Yeah, I think that was his interpretation because he saw a future where there were like nuclear bombs detonated and, you know, regional and international wars going on, guns, death, plague, disease, famine, like really harsh stuff. Chaos, yeah. And people suffering and children suffering and women and all that stuff and pollution. And that's what was shown to him. So he was pretty worried about that.
It's interesting because you mentioned the Jim Sparks case, which he wrote the book, The Keepers. And I found that fascinating. His whole story is fascinating. And I've watched his presentations before. And his case is unique for people who aren't familiar with it, because he claims to have conscious recall of years and years and years of being taken again and again. And he describes large reptilian beings. At one point, they're like 8 or 9 feet tall, these enormous beings. And his case and the Pascagoula case seem to stand out from most of the other cases because they don't have the
missing time
or the screen memories. There's no attempt to sort of shield them from the trauma of this event. They're just kind of thrown into it and left to deal with it.
Yeah, Jim's interesting too, because I've spoken to him before via email back in the day. I think he lives in Australia now. And he was saying that, he was in a cafe one day and a human walked in that just looked like a normal person, sat beside him, wrote with both hands in the opposite direction at the same time perfectly, and kind of conducted almost like feats of magic in terms of intelligence. And then the person conveyed that they were from the future. So he kind of has, he has the reptilian thing, he has the gray thing. He also has the story of like future humans interacting with our timeline, right? If you factor in maybe there is like wars or something that happened in the future, it might be just part of who we are. It's inevitable, but maybe we get over that bump and we go into an age of scientific and, technological prosperity, and we figure out time travel and we figure out space travel and we go back in time and visit, like time travelers, like explorers on our timeline. Who knows? Maybe that's what interacted with Calvin and Charlie. Might have been a research expedition, and maybe those were not humans. They were like AI or something like that.
The descriptions are horrifying, and the visuals that you've got in this docuseries they are nightmare fuel. When I watch them, especially the beings taking them on board the craft, and because they've got these horns, sort of these horn protrusions coming out of their ears, or where their ears would be, and like one coming out of the front, and they're described as such a robotic, almost like the in the day the Earth stood still. I think I couldn't help but think of those like 1950s style robots that are really stiff. And
also Doctor Who, aren't those like dialects, the things with like plunger, I don't know, coming out of their heads and stuff like that? Yeah, like there's elements of all that stuff in this story. Even their hands were more like pincers, and they didn't have legs per se. They just kind of had like this fused single like leg podium that they hovered around on, and the spiky protrusions from their head, no eyes, no ears, no mouth. And Calvin and Charlie recalled them kind of like whirring, like humming almost. So as if they were like machines, but they had skin. It was just like elephant skin. It was very sort of like tough and very wrinkly. That's what they were described as. Gray too.
Is there, as a filmmaker, as a creative person, as someone who's interested in this subject, is there a point for you where you kind of just have to get off the bus and you're like, I can't with some of these? Like, you talk about future humans and time travel, and I could see you smile a little bit. Like, some of these stories are out of this world, literally. And it's like, how do you square that?
Yeah, I think it's all fascinating. It's all interesting to me. Even the stuff that I think is like ridiculous, it's still interesting because it's the human aspect. It's like the people that these stories are based around, they are interesting too. Trying to think of examples or stories that I don't think are real or, credible. I mean, the Nazca mummies, those have come up recently. They've become really popular. They first got launched on Gaia TV back in 2019. There's some people that have been vocal about those and said, like, look, these seem anatomically incorrect, the small ones. And then sometimes they've been actually called out as being constructions, like cobbled together parts from different mummies. Paracas skull, which is the elongated skull put on top of like a Peruvian skull from elsewhere in the country, for example, the Nazca area. But I mean, like when people kind of push the love and light sort of stuff where we can kind of kumbaya with the non-human intelligence, that to me doesn't ring very true. I mean, we can with each other maybe, but I don't know if that's possible with like a non-human intelligence.
What would be your foundation? Like, how would you even begin to build a relationship with something that's so disconnected?
Yeah, I mean, like, okay, my theory is like, if we can't get along with each other, why would we get along with like an alien, something that's not even related to us, right? In fact, we fear each other's differences more than anything, right? We fear the other color, the other height, the other language. All these things people become xenophobic about. So why would we become like in love or best friends with a reptilian? You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me, but people talk about it, and that's interesting on its own. We can be friends with animals, so maybe it's possible, but you know, I don't believe that there's a galactic federation. That's pretty much
too far for me too.
That's a bridge too far for me, because we basically can't even really collaborate as a, international federation on the planet. To collaborate with a galactic federation of like reptile and tall whites and grays and all this other races, first we got to prove for sure that one of those races is real. I think that
let's start there.
Let's get over that hurdle, right?
Sure. Yeah.
If we get the smoking gun evidence that there is a certain race that is interacting with us, then we need the smoking gun evidence that there's another race, maybe some like us, maybe some don't. And that is a theory, right? I could buy that. I could buy that the future terrestrials like us because we're them, but we're so different maybe. They're like human 3.0 and we're still 1.0, right? And then, maybe the reptiles don't like us. I don't know. Maybe the grays are indifferent, but they want to exploit us. Like, these are things that I could see. I just don't see them working together and, being a love and light force.
That's a great point, because so you don't see eye to eye necessarily, or you see yourself in alignment with some of the stuff that like someone like Stephen Greer, for instance, claims to know for sure, like beyond question, that this is not an issue, that we're the problem, and you're not so sure.
I don't see eye to eye with Stephen Greer because, I mean, why doesn't his followers, why don't they push him a little further and say, how can you prove that these things have our best interest, these non-human intelligence? Why would they? What is in it for them? Are they deceiving Greer? Or is he just making this up because he wants to be the medium between these two parties, so that you follow him and give him your money and, go to his conferences, watch his movies, blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
It's tough when you have one person who's saying, like, I am it. Like, no one else knows but me. You have to look to me. And that's where I get off the bus.
I've spoken to many people that have kind of defected from Dr. Greer's tribe. And they told me when I shared my concerns about him, you know what? That's a valid concern. Because on the very first day I met him, I was in a room with the other people that we were going to start doing some work for him. And he said, the only one telling the truth about this phenomenon, everyone else out there is lying. That's problematic.
That's a red flag. That would be a red flag if your kid joined a group and their leader was like, I'm the only one who knows how to get into heaven. Don't worry. You know,
Yeah,
it's very culty.
Yeah. And that there's so many culty aspects to ufology, right? Everybody, you know, decides that they are part of a certain belief or camp. And once they've just like dug their feet in terms of supporting that belief or that camp, that group, they defend it. And they have a hard time seeing that they might be part of a cult. And in fact, I actually just did a series, I don't know if you know about this one, that's kind of about that. It's called Dark Alliance. And
I have it in my notes to ask you about Dark Alliance. I'm curious
okay.
about this.
Yeah. Well, it's an expose. It's a 2-part docu-series, only 2 episodes. Each is about an hour and a half. And we're talking about Corey Goode, the secret space program, New Age secret space program cult, and David Wilcock, and how they basically conned the whole UFO community into thinking they were telling everyone the truth.
Yeah. God, that opens a can of worms, doesn't it? That one. Because there's like this whole expanded universe, isn't there?
There really is. And I mean, there's still a lot of people today that say that they're secret space program astronauts or like space soldiers, secret.
I found myself watching a Gaia video the other day, and it was this guy, and he was like, yep, I was a space marine, and I served in the third intergalactic war against the Reptilian Federation, and and it was pretty brutal. He was like, we did basic training on the moon, and then we went to a Mars colony where and then I got my special training. This guy looked like the most average regular Joe. He did not look like a regular human marine, let alone a space marine. It's like, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, who really thinks that we're buying this?
Exactly. Yeah. That's the problem. So Gaia TV has become, it's like their specialty to take people that tell an incredible story with absolutely zero proof, and to deliver it as if it is proof.
I love yes, thank you for that. Because it's so true. The interviews all start the same. They're like, so you were an intergalactic space marine. Tell us about that. Just start from.
No. Yeah, it's like, so what's your name? Like, where are you from originally? Where did you get your education? Did you serve in any military agency or, department? No?
Right out of high school.
How did you become a space marine? Yeah, no. But that's the thing, like a lot of when they're pushing that, it's entertainment, right? Like it's Gaia TV, it's entertainment. And the dangerous part of this is that they have a huge subscriber base, right? That, it's millions at this point, but paying actively every year, it's probably around 600,000. And that's not including their YouTube channels and their conferences that they sell out tickets and their documentaries they release and stuff like that with other people into theaters and so on and so forth. So they have a big following, and when they have people say that they were secret space program, super soldiers and stuff like that, they present it as fact. They present it in the most, dishonest way I think possible, which is really messed up because it's almost like a PsyOp. Like
feels that way.
You're convincing a very large segment of a big group of people that this is real. And when I released Dark Alliance, I had a friend reach out to me and say, hey, a now friend, guy named David, really nice dude. He said, hey, I just wanted to say I watched the series. I thought it was great. I think you did an amazing job, presenting this data, and it's all facts. It's public record. It's information that we can count for is true. And he said, I've had an experience with somebody adjacent to them, Corey Goode and David Wilcock, very similar. They did this to me. They did that. They took my time, my money, blah, blah, blah. They really scammed me. And I'm like, I'm really sorry. It's another Gaia person. And figurehead, let's say, or like celebrity from Gaia. And I said, okay, cool. And then all of a sudden one night I was getting a call from this guy, David's friend, who was irate that I had made this series. I was on this video call actually, and I was looking at them. The person was pacing back and forth in the view of the camera and just furious, saying, "Why did you make this documentary?" And one of the very first things they said to me, which is culty and also, a proof of cognitive dissonance, they said, "I didn't even watch the documentary. I refuse to because I don't think you know what you're talking about." And I was like, okay, that's a good way to start a conversation with somebody that you're upset has presented data that possibly debunks some of the things that you're presenting on, right? I kept it calm and all that stuff, and it was fine, but it was just very weird. And that is the type of people that Gaia goes after. This is the type of people that they cater to and that they want to have speaking on their shows. They really are building their own cult.
It's a religion for atheists. It's like a UFO religion for people who just can't find a religion elsewhere.
I mean,
it seems that way.
I think it's new agey. I think it's adjacent to Christianity. Like maybe some people that are into yoga, they're into something a little extra, and they like the elements of spirituality in their programming. Spirituality is faith-based. It's like believing in something beyond, but not quite having some proof of it. And that's how they build their shows. It's like, I have faith in what you're saying. Now tell me about it. And
they're looking for people who want to just keep being fed a fantasy. They're hungry for it because it is entertainment, but it's an entertainment that sort of satisfies a need they have to feel like I'm part of this tapestry of events that's playing out. And there's that makes a lot of sense.
It feeds off of Zachariah Stitchin talks about Anunnaki. Anunnaki is brought up like 1 billion times on the Gaia TV network. Billy Carson brings up the Emerald Books of Thoth and then misrepresents the information about Christianity in his discussions and stuff. And he got checked on that recently by Wes Huff, and Joe Rogan had him on and they kind of discussed all that stuff. So the way that Billy Carson, who got launched on Gaia TV, he initially reacted was that he said he was going to sue all these people for discussing things that he had discussed in open public, and they're debating his information. They're basically saying, I don't believe what you're saying because here's the actual fact on this or whatever, especially when it comes to Christianity. I think Wes Huff is a theologian. He literally has a master's in theology. So he understands the history of the Christian religion and the different interpretations and stuff. And that's where Billy was speaking out of turn. He was misrepresenting a story from Christianity. And, Billy reacted pretty poorly. He said he was going to sue everybody that was checking him on that information. And that's exactly the same style that Corey Goode and David Wilcock have been taking recently. So Corey Goode, he left Gaia TV. He sued Gaia's founder and CEO, Yurka Kirsten, the vice president, Jay Widener, the head of production. He sued his former sort of partner on some business dealings outside of Gaia, which had to do with the documentaries that they launched, Above Majestic and Cosmic Secret, which he ended up taking all the money and not paying the partners like Jordan Sather, Leon Isaac Kennedy, Roger Richard Ramsor, or Adrian Youngblood. And he sued them instead and accused them for frivolous things because that's a slap suit technique. It's to tie up your opponent in federal court, or in not federal, in just court, so that it's costing them money, it's costing them time, and you're kind of like enacting legal warfare against them, right?
With the hope that they'll just bail.
They'll give
and
up.
Walk away.
Yeah, that they'll just get, like completely financially broke or what have you. And, in both cases, Leon Isaac Kennedy spent over $200,000 on his case defending himself. Jay Widener, the former head of production at Gaia, who I interviewed for the Dark Alliance documentary series, he spent over $60,000. So this is not like these people can do really horrible things when they started from this like altruistic point of view where they're trying to impart peaceful and really enlightening information about our existence and our place in the universe, and that we're not alone and aliens are here. But meanwhile, they're conducting like legal warfare like this, terrorizing people. That
Carson's
does not
an interesting case too, because he presents almost like a TV preacher. He's always in a suit. He fire hoses you with a ton of like a word salad that's full of sort of historical references to various different ancient cultures, and you're sort of like, oh, okay. And at the end, you're just kind of left with little cartoon birds flying around your head, and you're like, oh, yeah, that sounds about right.
So what happened was Corey Goode and David Wilcock left Gaia. I think it was 2018. Gaia was like, we've got a great show going here, Cosmic Disclosure, and we got to keep this going. So they brought in Billy Carson and they reshot the shows that they took down that they had with Corey and David Wilcock, and they re-uploaded, and that's how Billy Carson got his start. He became the new host of Cosmic Disclosure, just in the same way that David Wilcock would present, speaking to a camera, wearing a suit or some purple dress shirt or whatever the heck he wears, and being very confident and connecting like sort of metaphysical ideas with ufology and disclosure and aliens and all that stuff. That's what Billy Carson was hired to do. He's hired to come in and replace their other act. He did that quite successfully, and that's how he continued on with his own empire of that delivery style that you just described, the fire hose of information with very little, let's say, interaction with anybody else. Because usually if you're trying to deliver information, I mean, a TED Talk is different, right? Because you got slides, you got proof, you got things that you're bringing up to prove your point. But, if you're trying to impart some really good information and you do it in a fireside chat style, you should always have somebody that asks you novel questions, that, is able to bounce off ideas. These people really don't do that. They just talk at you very confidently. And I think the whole sort of cult following thing comes back because people that are used to being preached to, that's why I said this is very Christian adjacent. It's like a new agey group. People that are used to being preached to, they don't like to argue or question authority. They like to be spoken at like that. And then they go home and,
They want you to baby bird it into their mouth, and then they go home and,
Exactly. So that's why these guys do so well. And it's,
And Guy has built a whole business model around this.
Yeah. And it's very problematic in my eyes.
Do you get the sense that there's something more sinister behind that, or is Gaia just a business making money off of a fantasy that people want to believe in?
I have no idea why they do what they do, other than the person at the top who owns the company likes to present information that way. And they've been doing it that way since the start, so they're not going to stop anytime soon. I don't know if it's a PsyOp. I don't know. I mean, if, there's foreign interests or intelligence community that are using it, I have no proof of that. But, it's something that's been rumored.
Yeah. Gaia makes ancient aliens look like.
Yeah, I mean, I like ancient aliens. I think it's cool. Definitely, like, that's
There's
where
a whiff of truth to it. There's a, you know,
Yeah.
you can.
there's like, oh, there's this anomalous structure. That's weird. Like, it's a bit out of place here. Could we have really built it with Bronze Age tools? Like, I'd like.
Would it have been aliens? This
Yeah.
guy thinks so.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're letting you know they're speculating.
Yeah.
It's in there. Sure.
My favorite is David Childress. Like, where did these spheres come from? These strange looking balls that just seem to be sitting on the grass here. Super strange. Like, some of those people are really awesome. It's entertaining. They're asking questions, and then I think they are providing data, like they're giving you, it's all on the History Channel. They're giving you some historical value there. But yeah, Gaia, it's just like you said, like, so you were fighting reptilians on the edge of the galaxy on the Kuiper belt. What was that like?
Yeah. And then anything they say next, it's like, wow, that must have been crazy. There's no challenge, no pushback.
It's like, so what was it like living on the spaceship? How did you eat? What was your diet? Like all these like things I would get into, but it's like, yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to watch Dark Alliance because I've always thought this, I've had this nagging problem with all that Gaia content. And I was like, why has no one confronted this? It seems like this is a huge problem. Like everybody agrees this is ridiculous. Some of this stuff is just off the wall.
Look, there is just a huge population that it connects to, right?
Yeah.
So when you say everybody believes that this is off the wall, I mean, does everybody believe that it's off the wall? I mean, you and I might be more part of the minority.
Fair point. Did you ever see that? What was the name of the documentary about the Raelians?
Yeah, on Netflix.
Yes. What'd you think about that?
It's another cult. Yeah, Rael.
Yeah.
It started with the UFO sighting, right? That no one saw. It's kind of like, if there were pictures and videos of this UFO sighting that he allegedly had, that would be a great way to sort of start the mythos behind what his interaction was and
like
what
a Billy Meyer kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think, and Billy Meyer is also a cult.
Yeah.
I've been attacked by one of their cult leaders, Michael Horn.
Really?
Yeah, he called me the moron of ufology.
Wow.
Yeah, on his little website, theyfly.com. Just because I said Billy Meyer's been exposed for hoaxing things. Like, one of the very first things that was drawn to my attention about his case, he showed like a porthole window photo from allegedly inside the craft, and it showed dinosaurs outside the porthole because they had brought him back in time to show.
So of course it's dinosaur times.
They went to the prehistoric times. And then the famous photo of one of the Playaran occupants is
sunglasses.
No, a blonde lady.
Yes.
She's got like kind of bangs and like long blonde hair, big voluptuous lips, like very pretty. He said like, this is one of the Playaran. They'd come off the craft and they let me take a photo. That, you can go look online now, had been tracked to a dating show. He had taken a picture of this model or this lady that was actually on a dating show, a 70s dating show.
So he photographed his TV set.
Yeah. And said,
oh my God.
Yeah. And then, he was very good at, he was a model maker. They found stuff in his garage. Like there was all kinds of stuff, but he has huge following. And I was at New York Pine Bush UFO Festival last summer, and the Raelians have Billy Meyer's group have a booth at this street festival, and they have like binders full of his teachings and his photos and the book of Talmud, which is his own Bible. And I just started asking questions, and I brought up the like fake dinosaur, which it's literally like, you know, is it a brontosaurus is like the one with the long neck and like the long tail, and they always get eaten by a Tyrannosaurus. Anyways, so it's like one of those like figurines,
Plastic toy, yeah.
a plastic toy placed outside of like a little fake porthole window, you know. And I brought up that. I brought up like the Playaran lady, and they're like, oh, you know, that was placed there by the intelligence community. That was misinformation just to debunk him. And it's like, but dude, like there is evidence that he released that. Like there was no interception. It's like you're creating these unnecessary entities to explain why something is, because you just don't want to on board that you might be conned. And I think that's something that's covered in Dark Alliance too. We say to like Jay Widener, who was the head of production at Gaia for many, many years, he helped build them up. Like, why did you let this go for so long? Why did you not like stop the production of Cosmic Disclosure with Corey Goode and David Wilcock when you knew something was up? He said, like, I knew something was up, but he's like, people don't want to admit that they've been conned.
No.
They just don't want to admit that they've been had. And that's what happened here. And it's what happens all the time in this community. A con is well orchestrated, and it only gets carried so far because people will not give in and say, I was conned.
It's like you're so right. It's especially clear in that Netflix documentary on the Raelians, because it's like, you're right. This guy comes out of nowhere in the 60s, or was it late 60s or early 70s, Rael. He has this story. He starts telling it. He gets a little following. The following grows. He keeps telling the story. Suddenly, he's got these shoulder pads. He's got a uniform. They build a model UFO. He's coming out of it. And people are just like, yeah, I'm on board. I'm on board. Soon he's sleeping with everybody's wife. He's like, you know, and everybody's like, sure, yeah, okay, this is still good. This is still fine. They're cloning a baby. You know, this is like 1997. They, or whatever it was, they claimed to have cloned the first human child.
And there was no proof that they ever did.
No. And they even chased this woman down, and they're asking her, and she's like, I'm not going to tell because the clone is an adult now, and we want them to live a nice life. And it's this whole story. And I'm like, people, come on.
Yeah.
How does that story go? I was taken on board a craft. They told me that they created humans, yada, yada, yada. I have to sleep with everybody's wife now. That's my pitch.
I mean, it works for him, right?
It worked.
Yeah.
It worked.
But
and I think about, like, did you see you must have seen the Stephen Greer flare video. Have you seen this video?
Yeah. So when they were supposed to be doing a CE5, a summoning exercise at this ranch that he runs, they dropped flares in the sky and said that those were UFOs. It's a pretty smoking gun debunk of that exercise. Now, keep in mind, you can go back and look through the Wayback, Machine or just archives of previous CE5 events that he's hosted. He charges anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 per person to attend.
And it sounds like in that video, there's about maybe 10 or 12 people in just that one group. This is a weekend thing. And so he's making 20, 30 grand be, gross before expenses on everything else. And then, just every time he does one of these, he might be doing it, two, 3 times a month, maybe. Who knows how many times? There's all the other Stephen Greer expanded universe stuff that.
But yeah. I mean, you can look at that documentary. What was the last one? It was called like
Lost Century.
Lost Century, right? Yeah. If you go to the website, the landing page was a GoFundMe, basically. It was like, please give us your money so that we can make the documentary. And it says right on the website, they raised $600,000.
And the documentary is just him walking around.
And
just
I
him
heard
talking the same shit that he always says.
And I heard through a pretty valid source that the editor for that documentary only got paid $5,000.
Wow.
So where did all that money go, guys?
And
If I had $600,000 to make one of my films, I would use that money and set up my own entertainment network. It would be called like Gaia TV. Okay. I would probably be able to extend that money for like 3 decades because I'm cheap. I don't have like huge expenses, and the documentary. Yeah, I'm a guerrilla filmmaker. I don't even know how somebody could justify raising that much money before they've even shot the documentary. It's insane. But that is what it is.
And then when you watch the actual doc and you go look at it and you're like, that's the problem with all my issue with it. Not that I want to turn this whole thing into a let's, shit on Stephen Greer. But while we're on the topic, my whole issue with Stephen Greer is that it's always him. It's always just him. He's got this team. He talks about a team. We never see this team. I don't know anybody's name. Who's on his team? He's
Volunteers.
briefed everyone from every president. He's briefed. He's already talked to Trump. He's already been in the Oval,
Yep, sure.
And if you go to his website, which I just did actually while we were talking, the very first thing that pops up on drstephengreer.com is a very important message from Dr. Greer. And it says, we have been notified that a false character assassination campaign will soon be launched against Dr. Greer by corrupt interests wishing to stop the upcoming disclosures. This has been expected and will not, circled in red, deter us. If you have that's your opener. Don't believe it. Don't believe what you've heard.
Well, yeah. I mean, the Church of Scientology says that psychology and psychiatry are not real sciences, and they're actually evil practices that are meant to enslave you. You usually put out false flags like that on things that could probably corner you or, prove that you're committing some kinds of fraud. So, of course, the Church of Scientology do not want their members to walk into a psychiatry or psychologist office and get help for their issue and get deprogrammed. They want you to stay in their system. So as the world wakes up, we live in the age of information. People can check you on flares that are being dropped in your videos. People can check you on how much you made for a previous film and then went on to sell for like $13.99 or something a pop. They could check all that stuff, right? And the campaign to attack your character is sometimes just reflecting who you are to yourself. Society or any good friend is a mirror, and they reflect you back to yourself. And sometimes they reflect you when you're being great. Sometimes they reflect you when you are being really shitty. And people like that cannot take that reflection. They consider that to be completely impossible because they're narcissists to the max. They're infallible.
Do you find anybody particularly compelling on... We've got Jake Barber now, we've got Lou Elizondo, we have David Grush, we have, obviously Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who I think is obviously trustworthy for someone in his position. He just seems like a man in a position to know and with no reason to lie and tarnish his career. And then you have off to the other side, you have like Stephen Greer sort of occupies his own corner. And then you've got the Gaia people over here. Is there anyone that stands out to you right now, or any group of people who seem to be giving us accurate information that you trust, that you feel good about?
Well, I definitely think that Christopher Mellon and Lou Elizondo were witnesses to something when they worked at the Pentagon, right? And I think since they went public with those video clips they declassified, that was kind of like the real disclosure movement. That was really when it started in the mainstream beyond just like UFO conferences and books and stuff that was being shilled by people that probably knew about the phenomenon, but it wasn't coming from like a place of well-informed defense or military and intelligence standpoint. So I do think Lou and Christopher Mellon brought something to the world that was credible. And I think that they're still working behind the scenes. Like every year they're working out of Washington, speaking with lawmakers. Like the reason why those congressional hearings even happen is because these people are still working on this. Like they're still pushing. So yeah, I think those folks are credible. I think Jake Barber is interesting. I think he's credible about his background and what he did working at a test range and, you know, this UFO data. That was like his UAP video, you know, the egg. That's a little bit different. It's also like another something that's brought to us from beyond the veil. Trying to think. Yeah, Tim Gallaudet, I interviewed for my documentary Transmedium, which is covering ocean-based phenomenon. And I think he's a home run. I think he's credible and he wants to do the right thing by representing this subject from a scientific standpoint, working with people like Avi Loeb on the Galileo project. Yeah, I think there's more people like John Blitch just came forward. Stratton is credible. Yeah, people that are like from these legacy, you know, programs looking into the phenomenon, they all seem to be very credible. And I think they're, you know, these whistleblowers that David Grush was speaking about. Like David Grush, I think, is real. You know, I think he's legit. I think he held the security clearances. He held the professional background. He actually did brief presidents, unlike Greer. You know, this is all credible about him.
Carl Nell.
Carl
worked
Nell,
at
yeah.
Lockheed.
Yeah. Carl
For
Nell.
what, you know, he's 15 years at Lockheed, and where else was it? The other defense contractor that he was.
Yeah. So like Carl Nell is an interesting character, and he's speaking very adamantly that we're not alone and that he's been shown this material. You have to think that like if these people had the security clearances and were part of programs to be read into this stuff, they might have been shown videos, pictures, documentation that was classified and really are like smoking gun experiences. But we're not privy to that data. We just don't hold that kind of office in the world, and we're never really going to be privy to that data. So sometimes it is a bit of a trust me, bro, when they're saying like, yes, this is real. But I hope that there will be more data that gets brought out to the mainstream, to the public, that proves what they're saying. Only time will tell.
What do you make of this effort from Jake Barber's Skywatcher group now that's funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and they want to basically summon a craft, capture it, and then prove to the world that this is a real thing once and for all? Do you think there's a there?
Good luck.
I'll believe it when I see it, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could be real. Like, it would be amazing if they could do it, and maybe they will. I don't want to be negative about that, but, you know, there's been UFO summoners that drop flares. So,
yeah,
there's that too, right?
There's that too. What do you make of, we talked a little bit about the Stephen Greer saga in the sense of the flares and everything else that kind of surrounds him. But what do you make of the early stuff that he did? I think it was 2001 National Press Club briefing, and he started to bring forward all these His YouTube channel does have a pretty huge repository of interviews with whistleblowers who are all, they at least seem very credible.
It's all been put behind a paywall now.
Has it been put behind a paywall now?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You have to subscribe, become a member. I think somebody recently told me that like all that stuff that used to be free on his YouTube is no longer free. Sirius, I think it was called the Sirius Disclosure Project to begin with. There was great aspects of that. And, you know, I really liked Mark McCandlish, who talked about like the flux liner, the ARV alien reproduction vehicle, and Brad Sorensen being brought into this military airspace show and got shown these models by an accident because he didn't have the security clearance and stuff. Like, I think all that stuff, you had certain people that spoke at the initial, like Carol Rawson. Now, Carol Rawson, she's a little bit problematic. She says, like, she worked for Werner von Braun. Okay, we can prove that. But then she said, like, he made deathbed confessions to her about the alien invasion card being played and, you know, all these things that we just can't prove. It's just, it's a trust me ho line, you know? So, but there's interesting testimony there. John, who's the guy that witnessed the JAL Airlines UFO incident over Anchorage, Alaska? I think it was 1987. John.
That's the one John Lear talked about with George Knapp.
It'll come
to
to
Japanese pilots.
So what happened was this individual who worked for the FAA, he was notified that week, like immediately when it happened, that JAL Airlines flying from, I can't remember where it was originating, but it was going over Anchorage. They had this Jupiter-sized, like, glowing object in the sky, like the size of 2 football fields, and then it emitted 2 smaller objects, and it cast a green light in their cockpit. The little objects came right up to their plane. They even did evasive maneuvers, and ground control was communicating with the pilots the whole time this interaction was happening. They did big circles in the sky to evade the little objects and the giant object, right? They said it was like a miniature sun in the sky. And when they got back from that, they debriefed, you know, the pilot wrote diagrams of what they saw and everything they went through. It's really well documented. What's his name? John McSomething. He said that essentially they started conducting the investigation. They had all the papers together. And then he got a call from his higher up at the FAA, and they said, the CIA is here to meet with us. Bring all your documents. We want to discuss what happened. They go into this meeting room. He kept his copy, and that was released to Stephen Greer. And then he did testimony on that in the 2001 Disclosure Project, you know, National Press Club thing. So that's another great guy that came out of that. The CIA confiscated all the documents except for his extra copy. And, you know, they basically swept that whole incident under the rug. It was never discussed again. And literally they told everybody in that room, never mention this incident again. So if that's not Men in Black cover-up shit, then what is?
You mentioned Mark McCandlish, who is like a legend, and he's one of my favorites because the Fluxliner story is so
cool.
It's cool because it's so boring.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, he's like, yeah, it was kind of like dinged up and didn't really, it looked like it'd been used and kind of beat up and wasn't really that flashy.
It had like this lead paint splashed on the sides, like really crudely. It was like a soapbox UFO.
Yeah, like one of the early like beta test models they were trying to put together maybe, and they had just beat the hell out of this thing, and now it's just sitting in a building somewhere and they show it to people, but they don't really, it just felt like sometimes when I hear a story, I'm almost looking for the story that is less extraordinary, the one that's the least extraordinary is probably closer to the truth than the one that's been, blossomed up to be more than it actually is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like less like Gaia.
That's like, yeah, the further away we can get from Gaia, the more. Well, and McCandlish too, he is an aerospace technical illustrator. He had the skill set to draw all this and make it visible. And I'm curious, because you brought up Mark McCandlish, I kind of want to go here. Are you familiar with the Dan Burisch story?
Yep.
Can we talk about it?
Sure.
What do you think about the Dan Burisch story?
Don't believe it.
Don't believe it?
Yep.
Okay.
One person that is linked to Mark McCandlish and Dan Burisch is Michael Schratt. Michael Schratt is also like an illustrator, AutoCAD guy. He worked for, I think, Lockheed for a certain amount of years, and now he fully works for like Stephen Greer. But before he did that, I spoke with him a few times, and I don't think he likes me that much, but that's fine. Not everybody's your friend. He told me, because if you go back, there's a conference that was really popular at one time. What's his name? He's on X. He works for Enigma Labs now. It'll come to me. But this conference was put on in Scottsdale, Arizona area. It was called the International UFO Congress. Yeah.
Yes. You're talking about the 2011. I know the Michael Schratt presentation. Is this the one you're talking?
And he did the Dan Burisch presentation.
Right.
He talked about J-Rod and the fact that Dan Burisch was like this hero because he presents this case that there was a facility, an underground facility. Dan Burisch worked at it. He was a scientist to some capacity. How we can prove that, I don't know. While working there, J-Rod and him connected. He had to like go into the sphere, the clean sphere or something, and maybe clean or like do some kind of maintenance to this environment that they made to facilitate or lock down this creature, J-Rod, which was kind of like a gray mixed with a reptilian or something. It wasn't like a gray. Maybe it even had blue skin. I can't remember. But he said that it started telepathically connecting with his brain and flooding him with all this information, that J-Rod was a captive, that he was innocent, that he was from another galaxy or something. And, he's stranded here and he just wants to go home. Very, Steven Spielberg, E.T. adjacent. And eventually Dan conducts like this altruistic, heroic movement. There's a portal that was like open outside the clean sphere at one point, and he like pushes J-Rod through it or something, and that allows J-Rod to escape back to his homeland. I don't know. And so Michael Schratt at the end of that presentation says, and it's because of the heroism of Dan Burisch that we are now here today. We're not at war with this being, and we should thank him for his heroism in saving J-Rod. Everybody's like, yeah, whatever. So I asked him about Dan Burisch afterwards. I was like, I covered the Phil Schneider story. It was my very first documentary. It's called The Underground. And Phil Schneider talked about working on underground bases, getting into a firefight with aliens, and there's nothing that can prove that, but we can prove that there's photos of, his hand with less fingers before that time as an adult. So he was actually a teenager when he lost those fingers, but he said he lost it in this alien extraterrestrial battle. And I brought that up. I was like, changed my stance on that. I don't believe it anymore. And I was like, what about you and like Dan Burisch and the like J-Rod thing? And he was like, no, I don't believe it. That did.
Schratt said he didn't believe that story?
He said that to me.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you ask him now, I think he's found out more information about Dan Burisch that he didn't know before. And, he knows now. Interesting guy, Dan Burisch, had some trouble with the law. A lot of it was he would go into like these narcissistic rages when he would get drunk and he would go after his then wife. And I think he beat her. Yeah. So I don't know. Something doesn't add up there.
Something doesn't add up there. The Phil Schneider one, was he unalived? Like the rumors were that he was unalived in his hotel room with his catheter cord.
Yeah, that is the strange thing. Like they initially reported that he died of natural causes, and it was the coroner that found the catheter cord wrapped around his neck. And only once the swelling went down enough and he was, on a gurney being autopsied by funeral home. The coroner at the police station, they ruled natural causes, then passed his body on very lazily to the funeral home. The funeral home called his late ex-wife, Cynthia Dreyer, who I interviewed for the documentary. And they were like, yo, there's a catheter cord wrapped around his throat. Like, this does not look like from natural causes. And then she called the Clackamas County, which is in Oregon, detective, and they launched a late investigation and said, oh, okay, what's going on here? They did blood and urine samples. Those became lost, apparently. And that's what Cynthia said. And then they said that it was death by asphyxiation, suicide. But how somebody suicides themselves that way, he was found face down in his wheelchair like that. I mean, are you going to go like this in your, I don't know, like...
Would you really want to take a chance with a catheter cord, or would you try to like be more thorough?
Hang yourself or just use a bullet. Like he had guns. We know that he had all kinds of guns.
His story is wild. Like,
yeah,
the Green Beret pulled me into the elevator, and then he was blasting them, and then I got out, and I was barely, we just made escaped by the skin of our teeth. And
yeah, I think that is not true. I think that there's elements of that are just pure entertainment, and they're sensational, and they're created to attract attention to his persona, to his character. But what I do think is true is that we have underground bases strategically to keep certain things clandestine and secret, safe and out of sight and sound from the American or international public. I think that his dad was possibly part of Project Paperclip, brought over from former Nazi Germany, worked on the USS Nautilus, the very first nuclear submarine. We provide that stuff in the documentary. I think when his dad passed away, Otto Schneider, that Phil went through his dad's office and saw all kinds of files and information and was convinced, okay, this UFO stuff is real. My dad was part of that world. So he would go on lecture tour to conferences and stuff, and he would bring that information and he would show it to you at a booth, and he would present on it at a podium. And I think that's what maybe got him in trouble, because he was parading around real documentation and stuff. And, Cynthia said when he passed, like there was whole folders and boxes of stuff that were missing from the place he was renting at the time. It just seems like really sketchy the way he died. I don't know who did it.
Sure. Well, sorry to put you on the spot. I was hoping you'd solve the Phil Schneider. That one has just always been really interesting to me, but I think, yeah, you make a great point. He was on the circuit. He was kind of doing these speaking engagements, and I guess for a lot of people who may
It was only about 2 years, too. It was a very short amount of time.
But for someone who maybe doesn't have a very lively social life or is kind of lonely, and then suddenly they get a little bit of notoriety and they start doing, there could be, I could see how there could be it could be intoxicating to want to keep going with your story. Okay, well now, people want my autograph. People want to take a picture with me, or somebody, and you want to build on it. So there's definitely a motivation there to try and elaborate and build out a whole world. At
Yep.
some point, you just lose the thread, though.
Yeah.
There's another one I want to ask you about, one more, just for fun, because it's something that you seem to be really, you just very well read and very knowledgeable about all of these people. Have you at all come into contact with the Amy Eskridge story?
Yep. It's been offered to me to make a documentary about it. It's something I might possibly do. Who knows? Untimely death, her involvement with anti-gravity research and NASA. Yeah, it's pretty interesting.
I started to tiptoe into that story. I was just reading stuff about it. And I watched her interviews, and I was looking at the Institute for Exotic Science and watching those videos and starting to kind of familiarize myself with it. And then I looked into Ning Lee, Huntsville, Alabama, and there's one particular thing she said. You mentioned Operation Paperclip, but she had this one. This is the one where she's really drunk in this interview she does. I'm sure you've seen it.
A glass of wine.
There's one, or a beer or whatever. She's just the whole time. But she talks about Huntsville, Alabama, and she's like, when they brought the Paperclip guys over to the States, this is where a lot of them showed up. This is where they put them. And a lot of these Paperclip guys had families, and then those children grew up, and then they had kids, and there's like 3 generations descended from this Nazi scientist group that was brought over. And she was talking about this, and I thought, man, that is a fascinating angle that I'd never really considered. And as I looked into it more and more, and then I realized this story feels too dangerous to even look. I feel like I don't even want to touch it. It's too hot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the only stories, and I've reached out to a friend, Tyler Zaradnik, because he was posting about, he was posting on his Instagram about a swirl effect generator that somebody's recently made. And I was like, I would like to speak to that person. I would like to see the swirl effect generator. And he was like, dude, good luck. They won't even really talk to me. It's super secretive. They don't even, their life has been threatened. And that is that's the one area that I'm kind of scared to document a possibility of a real, free energy device, so to speak. Because that's what the APEC guys and, Amy Eskridge and Mark Sokol and Ventura and all those guys are after. They want to find a real working anti-gravity or free energy device. But
if Huntsville wasn't so weird, if that whole thing, if Ning Lee and Amy Eskridge weren't in the same business of anti-gravity, and there wasn't 2 very unique, very strange stories about these researchers, then it would be easy to kind of write it off. Well, weird stuff happens all the time.
Yeah,
but
Ning Lee disappeared. Ning Lee did those lectures, left the United States, boom, gone. They say maybe went back to China and they killed her. I don't know where the trail ends there, but
yeah,
I think once you start really playing with free energy type stuff and challenging a fossil fuel paradigm, energy structure around the world, that's where you're really in trouble.
That's a great way to put it. I interviewed Kelly Chase a few weeks back, and she said something that you just reminded me of. She said, I don't talk about aerospace companies. I stay away from that. That tends to be really bad for your health. And I was like, yeah, I think you're right.
It's never been bad for me. I don't know what she's talking about. Did a whole documentary on the TR-3B and said Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, I don't think
this was right when the Boeing whistleblowers had gotten. It was the guy who got unalived.
Yeah. I think it's not about what you know. It's about what you can prove. You can talk all you want, but as soon as you provide some kind of proof, data, something that's working, testable, blah, 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 that's where you're in trouble.
Is there a particular story that you're interested in that you want to go to next? What's next on the horizon for you?
Yeah, I'm working on something regarding psychic abilities and the phenomenon. So, us and them, us being psychic, them being psychic. Let's explore that together.
What's your own personal feeling on that whole notion?
I think we are psychic. I think it's, varying degrees of it, latent abilities that go from, precognition to I feel somebody's eyes on me right now at the mall, and that was proven with like Rupert Sheldrake's work. Our pets know when we're coming home, like that type of basic psychic phenomenon, the connection between owners and their pets. And then, Russell Targ, Paul Smith, all these psychonauts basically that were working for, at one time, the CIA and the DIA, testing psychic abilities as a intelligence asset. And then you've got experiencers who constantly report telepathy of different, situations, like whether it's...
I can't think. Can you think of a single case that doesn't involve a mention of telepathy? I can't.
Maybe the Corey Goode stuff, because they were like bluebird people that maybe spoke with their beak mouths. I don't know. No, I'm just joking.
It's like even the Pascagoula, you've got these guys who are, it's just regular guys. They're just regular dudes fishing, they're not thinking about telepathy, thinking about, it's not like they're super geeks and they really want this to sound cool. So they're adding in some details. It's like,
yeah. And you might have seen the first episode or something of the Pascagoula 73. Charlie Hickson, back in like the early 90s, late 80s, was saying, I believe the craft and the occupants have something to do with consciousness.
Yeah. Very out of place for that type of a person at that time to say something.
Yeah, was not something that was very prevalent in like late 80s, early 90s. And he was talking about that. He was talking about NASA's involvement with this stuff. It was great. Like, I loved hearing that from such like an early perspective from an experiencer.
Well, that's it. The NASA thing, that's a great connection, because you remind me of Gary McKinnon. Talk about proof. A guy who hacks into the NASA computers in the early mid 90s, and then basically they try to Julian Assange this guy for I don't know how many years. Yeah. They tried to extradite him, throw him in prison.
He used a really sneaky intrusion method, which is back in the day, like Windows Server, or just Windows XP, for example, Windows Server 2000, out of the box, it came with an administrator account for the software that you could log in to the OS by just typing in administrator and then the password, just leaving it blank and hitting enter. So he ran a program that used brute force methods and would try to run that command to start up as an administrator using the default administrator account on multiple of these servers. And he did it to JPL, Jet Propulsion Lounge. And that's where he said he saw off-world, crew manifest lists, and he was clicking on pictures and saw, an object outside the atmosphere of the Earth in space, and it looked like a non-human craft, right? I think his story is true. And I think that, but I don't, when he says off-world, manifests of crew, I think he just means like, because look, we had CIA, we had Air Force space missions that were completely classified. If you look at the Manned Orbital Laboratory or Skylab, these were not NASA astronauts. They flew up into space and lived on a space station that was not the ISS, that was not part of the Apollo program or anything. It was post-Apollo, and they lived in space for a long time, doing things in a space station. That's a real secret space program. So that's off-world manifest. That's off-world personnel, if you think about those crew members.
Did he say he saw stuff on the surface of the moon, buildings, pictures of buildings, or am I thinking of... I
think you might be thinking of Carl Wolf, who was also... Pardon?
Is he the photo lab technician who was?
Yeah.
Yes.
He was called to an NSA facility in 1969, I believe, or 1967, to repair basically a photocopier, like a photo printer, high-res photo printer for an NSA lab that was telemetering photos from the Lunar Orbiter spacecraft that was revolving around the moon, taking pictures of the lunar surface. And this equal ranking officer that was working at the base took him over to a table and said, look, we've found structures on the moon. And, you know, he saw like football stadium size structures that look like satellite dishes type things, and towers and strange stuff. I featured some of that stuff in my documentary series, Secret Space UFOs, because I was just trying to build a chronology of testimony, photos, and videos that have been taken in space about space missions to prove there's anomalies out there, that we're just going out into space at this point. There shouldn't be stuff already out there that looks it's been intelligently created or is operating intelligently around our spacecraft. So, yeah, I take those cases seriously. I think Gary McKinnon is the real deal, and they tried to extradite him because he, you know, he messed with the national security of the American industrial complex.
I read in
military. Sorry.
Day After Roswell, Phil Corso's book. And
Yeah.
he talks about, he was the intelligence officer who claims he was in charge of distributing the retrieved materials from the Roswell crash to various research companies and private partners to do research and reverse engineer. And he
Like
talks about in that book,
Westinghouse and Rand Corporation.
Yeah.
And who else was part of it? Like
IBM,
Bell
Labs, yeah.
Bell Labs. Yeah.
All the people you would think. And for one, that story seems very believable because it just seems like that's exactly what you would do. It doesn't seem like out of the, you know, if you've got all this stuff, who would you take it to? Well, you take it to the best of the best.
We shot a balloon that was Chinese made out of the sky off the coast of North Carolina. And they immediately got to reverse engineering what the technology was and what the data was on, you know, the apparatus hanging from the balloon. So we do that. Of course.
He said, in The Day After Roswell, he talked about how back in the 60s, he was like, back in the 60s, the Army had plans to put a base on the moon. We had it all drawn up. We had the nuclear reactors. We had the prototypes. We had them all ready to go. They were the size of a refrigerator. We could power our moon base. He's like, we had it all. We had this whole thing was all planned out, and they were going for it. The Army had their own space program, separate from everything else that was going on.
Actually, in my documentary, NASA's First Missions, we show a document that it's an Air Force official document where they say that there are three main objectives with the space program in 1959. So before they even had functioning spacecraft out there in cislunar space, was to have weapons that could drop nuclear warheads from space and have bases on the moon which could have, you know, command and control of Earth.
They had something like a what's it called? Rods from God. Have you ever heard this term?
Mm-hmm.
A tungsten rod. Just no nuclear warhead, just a big rod of tungsten dropped from, you know, fired from a base on the moon would have the destructive force of an enormous atomic explosion. I mean, it was like just these unbelievable weapons. And I can't believe, it's really hard for me to believe that we would never put a base on the moon and that we didn't. I have to believe, for me, I'm just convinced that's already there. And there have been operational bases on the moon, both from probably our own military and probably the Russians, maybe the Chinese, who knows, for at least 25, 30 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish that there was evidence that we did. It would make sense. I mean, logically, when you look at like the military spend that has accrued since, you know, 19 fees every year. It's like almost $1 trillion. You could do a lot of money with that, especially if you have the accounting practices in which the military is allowed to get away with. Like you or I get thrown in jail if we evade taxes and we don't claim things properly in terms of what we've spent our money with and how we've spent it every year with the government. But the military, they have no such, they've failed every audit.
Yeah.
That says
I was hoping Elon would go in there and straighten them out, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen now that he's in charge of the federal government.
I don't think anyone's higher than the DOD. I think he'll go in there and they'll straighten him out.
I think you're right. It's funny because he's like, we're going to reduce waste. And I'm like, can you start with the military? Can we come to education later and we'll look at all this other stuff after let's go through the military budget first.
Yeah.
It's like $857 billion in there.
Yeah. There's like generals that have been, operating from a place of power for 20 years there. And a president has a 4-year term, maybe,
Yeah. Yeah. And
imagine what you can do when you have that. When you have that amount of time, you can do all kinds of crazy power moves, especially when you have a budget that makes you more powerful than God.
Functionally limitless budget, no oversight, no checks and balances, and a mandate to do anything that it takes to protect America, whatever that means, in your view. You get some real Dr. Strangelove kind of...
Yeah, and it kind of says a lot whenever you see the new presidents that come up year over year. They never talk about challenging the military budget. They're always scared to discuss that. They'll talk about healthcare. They'll talk about, the borders and, innovation economy and energy economy and stuff like that. But they'll never be like, we need to gut the DOD and cut their budget. It's like, they're all scared. They're all scared of.
Who's robbing the American people? The Department of Education. That's the one. We need to get in there and straighten
Department of Education. The people that are supposed to be educating people and making the new generation smarter than the last.
What is this school lunch program for poor children? We don't need to waste money on that. Yeah.
Anyway, it's been great chatting with you, man.
Thanks. I know you got to run, and we've gone up to our 2-hour limit. But is there anything else you wanted to mention before we go?
No, just check out my latest doc series, Dark Alliance and Pascagoula 73. Really appreciate you having me on. Hope people learn something from my recent work and my past work. They want to check it out. It's my website's occultjourneys.com. And you can search my name, Darcy Weir, on many of these different streaming platforms, Amazon Prime, Tubi TV, Roku, and watch my work there.
Cool. Darcy, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thanks, Clint. It's been fun.